Hello and welcome to Chapter 11, Lesson 1. Today we're going to be measuring with a ruler. So please get your rulers out and let's get to measuring. So the first thing we're going to talk about is rulers measure length. It is the measurement of distance between 2 points. You can use a ruler to measure the length of objects to the nearest ½ inch or quarter inch. Okay, an inch is a unit of measurement of length, a customary unit of measurement of length. So notice we have 1 inch here and 2 inches here, right? And so if I cut that inch right here and right here, this line is worth ½ an inch, 1/2. And this line right here is worth 1 and 1/2. A really good way, like this is for mixed numbers too, that I love that I saw, is it's like time on a clock. Okay, so if this is 12, 3, 6, 9, 1, 2. Okay, so let's say the hour hand is between the 1 and 2. Obviously, they shouldn't be that close, but has it touched the 2 yet? Like, let's say this is the line for 2. Okay, has it touched the line for 2 yet? No, so that means it's 1 something. Okay, so right here, if we're looking down here back at our number line, right here, has it touched the 2 yet? No, but it has touched the 1, so we know it's 1 inch and then we notice it's halfway between 1 and 2. So the other thing we're going to talk about today is quarter inch, which is 1/4. Now, when I think of quarter inches, I think of, okay, $1, $1 equals 4 quarters. Okay, and what are we cutting each inch into? 4 equal parts. Okay, so 4 quarters, 4 equal parts. That's kind of what we're going with. So I'm going to really try to hone in on these mixed numbers today. So let's just get started. The width of a button is the length of the widest part of the button. Find the width of the button to the nearest ½ inch and quarter inch. There's going to be 2 answers for this here. Okay, so we know that this would be 1½ and then this part right here is 1 1/4 inch. And this one right here is 1 3/4 inches. So 3/4 pieces, right? So we cut this into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. Okay, this one's the 3/4. This is the 1/4. And then we know that 1/2, if we're talking equivalent fractions, is the same as 2/4. And really we don't use 2/4, we use 1/2 because we want to use simplest form. So if we're looking at what is this number, what is this measurement to the nearest quarter inch, or let's do ½ inch first. Okay, so that means we're going to say, is it closer to 1½ or is it closer to 2 inches? So when we're talking near to the nearest ½ inch, we're talking wholes and halves, right? Because if I'm going up by ½ inch, I'd stop here at a half, then I'd stop at a 1. I'd stop at 1½ I'd stop at 2. I'd stop at 2½ I'd stop at 3. So we're either doing our wholes or our ½ inches. So what is this to the nearest ½ inch? Okay, it looks like it's closer to 1½ to me because I'm going right here versus right here, right? Closer to 1½ So to the nearest ½ inch, the button is 1 1/2 inches wide. Because I've passed the 1, so I know I need to put a 1 in front of it. I have not yet gotten to 2 inches. And anything before 1, we put nothing because we've only passed the 0. So it's just regular old 1/2, 1/4, 3/4. Okay? So to the nearest quarter inch, let's take a look at that. Let me erase all my markings here. Okay. So, to the nearest quarter inch, we're looking at this. 1/4 is this line. We're going to also look at 1/2. And we're going to look at this line right here, which is 1 3/4. So when we're rounding to the nearest or measuring to the nearest 1/4 inch, we would measure to 0, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, 1 inch. 1 1/4 of an inch, 1 1/2 inches, 1 3/4 inches, 2. 2 1/4 inches, 2 1/2 inches, 2 3/4 inches, and then it would be 3 inches. So that's kind of what we're doing. That's our pattern we're going to follow. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1 hole. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, the next hole. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, the next hole. So that's for measuring the 1/4 inches. So if we look at what is its nearest 1/4 inch, we are going to be looking at, okay, is it closer to 1 3/4 or 1 1/2? It's closer to 1 3/4 inches. Okay, let's go to the next one. Circle the more precise measurement of the button in the first activity. So is it better to say it's closer to 1 1/2 inches? This is past the 1, so I know it's 1 1/2. Or is it better to say it's closer to 1 3/4 inches? Really, it's much closer to 1 3/4 inches than it is to 1 1/2 inches. Okay, measure the length of each to the nearest 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch. So notice I'm not going to line it up at the end. I'm going to line it up at the 0. Okay, so if we're looking at the nearest 1/2 inch, this would be 1/2 inches, and this would be 1, right? This would be 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/2, 3, and so on. So let's see, is this closer to 1/2 or 1? It's closer to 1 inch. Okay, so that's to the nearest 1/2 inch. And then if we wanted to do to the nearest 1/4 inch, that would be 1/4. To the nearest 1/4 inch, it would be, let's get to the nearest 1/4 inch. Now we're going to be looking at this line right here and this line right here. Those are our 1/4 inch lines. And then the smaller ones that are in there are our 1/8 inch lines, because it cut our inch into 8 equal pieces. Okay, so I'm going to say, is it closer to 1 or is it closer to 3/4 of an inch? Well, it's still closest to 1 inch. So when we're measuring to the nearest 1/2 and 1/4 inch, both times our answer is going to be 1 inch. Okay, I do need to scooch this little guy over. So it would be 1 inch for that one for both of them. Now let's look at the dog bone here. Again, line up at 0. It's kind of hard to do it on an iPad, so hopefully you can do it a little better with your ruler. Okay, so to the nearest 1/2 inch. Okay, so we're going to be looking at 2. 2 1/2 is that longest line in the middle, and 3. So I notice it's really close to 2 1/2, not so close to 3, so we're going to say it's close to 2 1/2 inches. INCHES, sorry, that's a little messy. And then to our 1/4 inch, we are going to be looking at, oops, that's not the eraser, that's the highlighter. And now it won't let me erase. All right, so we're going to looking at is it closest to 2 1/2 or 2 3/4, right? Because this would be 2 1/4. So our pattern goes 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. So is it closer to this line? Or is it closer to this line? It's still 2 1/2 inches. Right? Because we still, when we have our 1/2 inch, that's if we're measuring quarters, that's even if we're measuring eighths, right? If it says measure to the nearest inch, then we would just use 1, 2, and 3. But when we're using 1/2 inch, that 1/2 quarter inch, eighth inch, that half inch always counts. Because if we're counting by halves, eighths, fourths, we always hit that half mark. Draw a line segment with each of the following lengths, 2 and 1/4 inches. Okay, get my ruler out. I'm going to start at 0 here as best I can. All right, here's 1 inch, 1.5, 2 inches. Now, here's 2.5. Oh, come on. Why aren't you working? Oops, I must have slipped my pen off. There we go. So this is 2.5. So this would be 2 and 1/4, 2 and 3/4. So I need to go to this mark right here. 2 and 1/4 inches long would be about that long right there. Now the silly thing is it won't let me move my ruler without using the line. But anyways, so there we have 2 and 1/4 inches. Okay, let's try the next one. A 3/4 inch line. So there's no whole number in front. So that means I can't go past 1 or 2 or 3 because then I would have a whole number. So I have to be less than 1 to draw a 3/4 inch line. So remember, this is 1/2, 1/4, 3/4. This will be 1 and 1/2, 1, oh, wrong. 1 and 1/4, 1 and 1/2, 1 and 3/4, 2. 2 and 1/4, 2 and 1/2, 2 and 3/4. So we're using these. The biggest line in the middle is the half, and then the other two bigger ones are fourths, 1/2, 3/4, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1/4. Well, see, now look. I got them wrong at the beginning. I'm glad I went over and looked at that again. 1/4, 1/2. That must be why I got the other one wrong. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. So 3/4 of an inch is going to go to this line right here and start at the 0. So that is a 3/4 inch line. Vocabulary check. Choose the correct words to complete this sentence below. Length is the measurement of, I circled it in the first slide, the distance. Okay, between 2 points. Length is the distance between 2 points. So if I have a point here and a point here, hopefully you're remembering, Mrs. Hamer, that's called a line segment. Yes, you are correct. Right? If I go, goes on forever, that's a line. This is a line segment. If I have a point and one side goes on forever, that is called a ray. Here's me getting in some geometry. Okay. The height of Josie's dog is 11 and 1/4 inches to the nearest quarter inch and 11 inches to the nearest half inch. Which measurement is more precise? Now, this one really made me think, because there's always the person in me that says, oh, well, maybe it is 11 inches, and so near to the nearest half inch. But if it's measuring different to the nearest quarter inch, then we would know that 11 and 1/4 is more precise, right? Because in the two examples we did in this video earlier, when it was closest to 1/2 inch, or when it was closest to quarter and 1/4 inch, and it was the same answer, then we could have said, oh yeah, well that would be 11 inches then. But because we added a quarter inch when we're measuring to the nearest quarter inch, that means that the quarter inch would be more precise. Precise, because it is a smaller measurement. measurement, and then Mrs. Hamer says, what is it? So we better replace that, because 1/4 inch is a smaller measurement than 1/2 inch. So it is more precise. Right? Like when my husband is measuring to make things with wood, because he likes to do that, he sometimes has to measure to the 16ths to get really close to being exact, because wood doesn't let you be off, right? You can't stretch wood out or make it smaller. You have to be exact. So sometimes he's even measuring to the even smaller line on the ruler. So it's really important. Like eighths would be more precise than quarter, 1/4 inch, because it's a smaller piece, right? Think of a pizza. If you have a pizza cut into 4 pieces versus a pizza cut into 8 pieces, these are going to be smaller. Same as if we go to the 16ths that I was talking about, that's smaller yet. Right? If you cut a pizza into 16 pieces, they're going to be pretty small pieces. You're going to have to eat more to get full. So there we go for that one. Allison has a ruler that is marked in 1/4 of an inch and a tape measure that is marked in 1/2 of an inch. So we've got 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch. Which measuring tool will give Allison a more precise measure? So this is the same thing as the last one. 1/4 give a more precise measure because they are smaller than halves. Right? Because if we have on our ruler, let's say this is 0, this is 1, and I'm measuring in halves, look how big those pieces are. Right? Because what if something's right here? Well, I suppose then we'd measure it to 1, but those are pretty small pieces. Like I've got to jump here and here. I'm not catching anything that falls in between, whereas if I get something right here, this would be the 1/4 line, and this would be the 3/4 line. Now my jumps are much smaller, which means I can be more precise. Gretchen measured the length of her toaster to the nearest 1/2 inch to be 9 inches. Steve measured the toaster to the nearest 1/4 inch and found that it measured 9 1/4 inches. Who used a more precise measurement? Okay, same type of question. They just really want to drill home with you that 1/4 inches are more precise than 1/2 inches. Steve is more precise. All right, the same thing. Precise because 1/4 inches are smaller than 1/2 inches. Okay, there we go. Let's keep going. Oh, would you look at that? That's all I have for you today. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.